Good evening, and a very warm thank you to Janet for making us so welcome, and the National Autistic Society for inviting Paul to speak tonight. My name's Mary Kennedy. I'm a supporter for Paul, and he's now in demand all over the country. And we have got another talk coming up on the 9th of July in Witney. If you do know anybody who missed out tonight who would like to hear him, it's 7 till 9 o'clock in Witney on the 9th of July. Tickets are available from the Autism Oxford website. There are some leaflets next to Paul's books, so please help yourself. And the website also gives details of any talks that we organise. Just a brief word about Autism Oxford. It was set up by my boss, Cathy Eringy, in 2009. Her son, 20 years ago, was diagnosed at the age of 3 with autism, and the doctor said, I don't really know what that is. And she likened it to being told her son needed heart surgery, but we don't have a surgeon to do it for you. So she made it her life's sort of passion to understand everything she could about autism. And that resulted in taking a degree in autism studies at Birmingham University. And she realised over the years she learnt more from listening to people on the spectrum than she did from the professionals and studies that she did. And with that in mind, she set up to employ and train autistic adults to speak in public about their lives and their struggles, and what has, and to give hope to people that, as Paul, is now the proud author of 3 books. He's now gone on to make a success of his life as a speaker and an expert on autism. And that's his special interest, is Asperger's and autism, and high-functioning autism. The book's Living Through the Haze, which is his first book, and then the second book, Life Through the Kaleidoscope, which he will talk about tonight. And this is his scotopic sensitivity syndrome, which he only recently found out he had. And I'm feeling more and more there are young children out there who are bumping into things, not being able to say that they're seeing everything in a pixelated way, and that if Paul didn't have his glasses on tonight with these fluorescent lights, your heads would be floating around. The trees outside would have the roots and the branches, but there'd be no middle to it. And by having these special glasses that he's wearing, he'll explain how it brings the image together. The first time they got the lenses right, he looked out the window and the tree came together. And he just feels all those years he could have been seeing things not in a fragmented way. And yet he did pass all the sight tests that a lot of children go through. And it's similar to me. I'm blind in my right eye. Nobody realised that till I was 3 and my aunt waved a bit of toast at me. I just thought everybody saw like I do. So I feel it's a similar situation, for a lot of autistic children. They've got fragmented vision, but they can't verbalise it and tell you that. Right, but I'll leave that for Paul. The books are on sale. We've got a hardback version of Living Through the Haze, that's £15. The softback books are £10 each. If you don't have any money or checks with you tonight, you can buy them on Amazon website. And Paul will be around at the end to sign any copies if you want them signed. And we are going to have some questions, but despite how articulate Paul sounds, he does have processing disorder. So when you ask your questions, if you could please try and get to the point, be precise. Don't sort of make it a really long-winded question, because he'll be so busy hanging on to the second word that you said that he'll miss what you're trying to ask. So try and think of the questions you want in as short words, shorter sentences as possible. That would really help. And with great pride, I'm going to hand over Paul now to speak about Living Through the Haze and life on the autism spectrum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, this speech will just check my words there. This speech is basically going to be my life from non-verbal child to the adult I am now, and the journey's all in between. So education, employment, go through mental health services, diagnosis, etc. And I'll also be talking about the various processing issues that I have and that I recognise I have through lots of research and talking to other people on the autism spectrum, and I hope you enjoy it. Next slide, please. So, obviously I was born, everybody's born, I wasn't found in the garden amongst a cabbage patch or anything like that. Nothing magical or mystical there. I was born in 1986. A few theories that I have, not for all autistic people, but I remember reading on some website, I should know what it is, I think it's Yahoo News. Sometimes they put good things on Yahoo News that catches my eye. And there, I believe some specialists found a sort of correlation between prematurity and traumatic birth and autism. Has anybody heard of that before? Put your hands up. Yeah. Oh, one. Oh, that's good. I'm not alone. And also, with that in mind, that's one of the theories, my personal theory, why I'm autistic. I was born a month premature. I also believe that there was, because of various things, complications going on. It was an emergency cesarean section, so my mum and I were in distress. I was in distress. My mother was in distress. There was, I don't know, there was something wrong inside, in the sense that I was panicking and they needed to get me out quick. So I was born in May, but I should have been born in the June. And genetics as well. Not everyone has a family where they're all autistic, but I'm sure. Have you suspected any other family members are autistic? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Yeah, down the lines, thinking of maybe your eccentric aunt or uncle or a brother you know. Do you relate to that? Yes. Yeah, I'll be going into that later about genetics, because in my family it's very specific with mine. We're all autistic. My mum, my dad, my grandfather on my mother's side, and my grandma is going for a diagnosis at the end of this month. So there's this very strong genetic correlation in my family. Does that relate to anybody here? Do you suspect there's other family members?
Yes.
Yeah, on the spectrum?
Yes.
Have you told them? No? Is that no?
Yeah.
A bit of a hard subject to pray through, isn't it, sometimes? But yeah, and that's a picture of me at about 6 months of age. It really does look like myself and my Teddy have had an argument, a very bad one. And basically, there are early signs of autism. Can you see them? Yeah. Do you know, somebody's actually pointed out to my eyes. Do you notice that's a sign of visual fragmentation? Very subtle sign. I'm glad someone pointed that out. Is anybody familiar with Donna Williams? Yes. Have you seen her baby pictures? About the whole structure of her. She says she had a deficiency, and she often jokes about her banana legs. Have you seen? I suggest you check it out. Her development through pictures is very interesting. But yeah, the eyes are a sign. Do you notice how one's going in and one's going out? It's to do with that sort of peripheral sort of vision. Have you noticed that some autistic people look sort of the side of things rather than full on, because it's too intense to actually look at something head on, because it's far too overwhelming. Also, something else, I'm not smiling, and also my posture. It looks like I've just been propped. I've sort of just been moved like some sort of doll. So those were the early days. And also my dad's got Asperger's syndrome. In a lot of my early baby pics, he's lined me up with loads of teddies that are all neatly lined up, and I'm just amongst them. So there's signs there that something was going on. Next slide, please. So early development between, 1986 and 1989. My mum knew I was different. Any mothers here had a sense that their child's different?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that. I believe it's a lot to do with, I don't know if you agree, that sort of bond you have with your child when they're growing inside you, and you know your child. It's just that sort of sixth sense. And my mum knew I was different because of my it's a fancy word. Atypical just means unusual. So I just sometimes like using fancy words. So atypical crawling is basically what was actually happening. It was the early developmental milestone that I was missing. And what basically was happening down in my grandma's house. My mum and I lived there, and my dad as well, all cramped in this house, a load of autistics, brilliant. So I was born in the right place. And what was happening, I'm left-handed, but I was using my right arm to crawl on its own. Not this was just there. And I wasn't using my legs. So I was just using my arm. So it actually looked like I was physically disabled. I was just using one arm to just crawl, almost clasping at straws. I'd have made a good hero in an action movie. No, you know, just crawling across the floor in this very unusual way. Now, of course, that has had a developmental effect on my legs. And believe you me, when you miss milestones, they affect your development. Does that make sense? But the top half of my body is quite fluid and moves very well. But if you notice, my legs are very stiff and they don't coordinate properly because I didn't pick up that milestone where there was strength in my knees and my legs and also my back as well. I haven't got the best posture in the world because I wasn't using the muscles. Does that kind of relate? And a lot of autistic people do have an unusual gait, don't they, walking. Some on their tiptoes, some are very hard, almost heavy-footed. I'm that, very heavy-footed. And actually I get pain down my hip and down my leg, a very dull, nasty pain because I'm just slamming my feet into the ground. And I don't actually understand how large my legs are in space. I don't understand how long they are. So if you think about that body disconnectivity, of course I'm just going to be walking around like this because I'm not actually knowing how big my body is or my legs or how, you know, where I am within the environment. The only way I understand the sense of myself in terms of my body is if I wear something tight around the trunk. Other than that, I'm just a floaty head thing, just moving around in space. So, does that sort of connect, the sort of clumsiness or the not quite knocking into things, tripping over, all those things there. So, later to be potty trained, so that's another developmental thing, isn't it? Another delay. And hyperactivity, I was always running. My mum, I was late to get to my feet, you know, 18 months is late to actually get up onto your feet because next door there was a typically developing youngster, it took him 10 months. So you can see why my mum started to piece together these differences in my development. Headbanging as a child. My mum used to remember me just banging my head, the top of my head, and then looking up at her and smiling. But I would sit down, so I'd just move my whole body forward and slam my head into the floor with force. She said it sounded painful. Does anybody relate to that? Any signs? Yes? Yeah. My theory is to that, it's that disconnectivity with the body. I need to feel it because I'm not aware of it. So the oddity in smiling was actually, oh, I get a sense of myself for a bit. So although it looks unusual, there's actually a logical reason why I was doing that. It looked like I was mentally ill, it may have looked like I was psychotic, but that was not what was going on behind the behaviours. What was going on behind the behaviours was autism. And that is as simple as that. Appeared deaf and blind. My mum said you didn't appear to see, you didn't appear to hear. Now, it isn't the fact that I am physically deaf or blind, it's because I've got processing issues with receptive language and I've got the most hampering part of my autism. I don't like to speak always very negatively about my autism, but the reason why I've got these glasses on today is really the most disabling aspect of my autism is my visual fragmentation, and I will go into that later. I really do need these glasses to just navigate through the world, to perceive it. I'll go into that later. And late speech and delayed functional speech, it took me until 7 or 8 years old to gain speech. So that was another milestone she was noticing that wasn't there. Mothers are always right anyway, so in the case of your child, you know your child. And I've heard a lot of stories about GPs, not that I have anything against GPs, just in case there's some here. No, seriously, I don't. I've met some good GPs, but sometimes you get that sort of overreactive mother syndrome, or boys are later. I've heard that one. Boys develop later, and stuff like that. What I'd really like a GP to do sometimes is just put their hands up and say, "I don't know what's going on. Let me pass you on to someone who does." That makes far more sense to me. Yes.
Can I just point out that your parents didn't put any pressure on you to speak before you were ready?
That's correct. They didn't put any pressure or any need for me to speak. One of the things I say in previous speeches I've done, what helped me, that basic foundation that helped me in those early years, was that my parents loved me and accepted me for who I was. They didn't have Asperger's or autism as a label or a pathway or a thing for what I was. All they'd done is accepted me for me, and I believe that's why I had a healthy relationship with my parents, because they accepted me for who I was. They knew I was different, but they didn't necessarily think I was defective. So that was the way they were looking at me. I wasn't brought up in a negative household. I'm not saying that parents are negative with autism, because they aren't. But when you hear about deficits and disorder, it's kind of, what's good about my child? Do you see that? What is his or her abilities within his autism? That makes sense to me. You can go on and on about what's wrong, but let's sometimes talk about, or go on and on about what's right. Yes. And also, when I gained speech, it wasn't speech of a typical 7 or 8-year-old. It was about a 3-year-old. So, you see, so it was almost playing catch up. Next slide, please. So, Mother was very, very concerned about my integration during the late 80s and early 90s, because parents, not my parents, although to some degree they did, but they just accepted me, but parents and teachers did not understand my behaviour. And when I went to preschool, it was a little hut with about 10 children, and all I used to do, my day would be lovely and simple. I'd run round the hut, sit down for a puzzle, run round the hut, have my food and drink, run round the hut and go home. What's missing from that day? Interacting with kids or going up to the teacher and crying or whatever. But just people seemed invisible to me. Shadows. It was like my world was very much like in my second book, like a visually and from an auditory point of view, a kaleidoscope. I didn't have time to sit down. My senses were always buzzing, so I couldn't sit still to perceive. I had to just keep going. But I had no concept of tomorrow or yesterday. I was always living in the now, which I sometimes think is a very nice place to live. I was just constantly living in the now like an animal, and I'm not using the word animal in a derogatory term. My dog, what I value about her is that she just lives for the now all the time. She's just living in the moment. She doesn't reflect. She's just always within the moment, which is a nice place to be. So echolalia and echopraxia came in terms of just echoing theme tunes off of television programmes, and my favourites were Blockbusters and Blind Date. So they always used to joke, we know what Paul's been watching last night, but do you think I really cared about what Blockbusters and Blind Date was all about? No, I just liked the first 2 minutes of it with this nice little tune to hum. So there were signs there. And yeah, those were really the cusp of my preschool years. And also the difficulties that came was, because I wasn't diagnosed, the problem was one of the head teachers of the preschool whatever it was called, has built up an assumption of what was going on, and it wasn't a very good one. She thought the reason why I was acting and behaving like I was because of being mentally ill, or the fact, or even worse, the assumption was made that my parents were physically or verbally abusing me, or both. So that's the danger of not being diagnosed early. Other people make assumptions about what they're seeing and where it comes from, and they were getting it completely wrong. So when people say to me, do you feel sad about what happened years ago? Of course I do, but I don't dwell on it. The people who I really feel sorry for, if anybody, are my parents, and the things that were said to them and the assumptions that were made about them during my early years. That's what upsets me, that they were told they were bad parents, basically, which wasn't very nice. Next slide. So early years, primary school, unable to perceive nor learn. I was living in a sensory-based world. What I say to that is, a sensory-based thinker is someone, personally, who's on a developmental journey, which is significantly different, in my case, to my peers. I didn't understand language. I didn't understand visuals. So what do you think I was doing to compensate? Partly, but also being kinesthetic. I was touching and feeling stuff to gain forms. I loved, when I was younger, just taking my shoes off and just feeling the grass under my feet, scrunching leaves, going outside, being with nature, because it's all different textures and feels, and it was a place where I felt safe, and a place where I could feel myself. But a lot of the times at school I was locked in, and I would just lock into certain things. One of the other things I liked to do was, I had an obsession with water. And water, I would flush toilets everywhere I went and stim and flap at the water. So I have a funny story about going to the zoo, and they were going to me, Paul, look at the tigers, look at the birds. But no, I was saying Lulu. So I didn't give a damn about the birds or the tigers. I just wanted to see the water, and I actually consider that my first friend, because everywhere I went, he was there. So it made sense to me that that was my first bond in terms of the outside world. Of course, my first obvious bond was my mum and dad. But in terms of the outside world, it was water and objects. It didn't mean I was unempathetic to people. It just meant that I just connected with that instantly, and I considered that just as much a friend as a human being. See? Does that correlate with some of what your children do with objects, and they like objects, take objects with them, or like particular objects? Because there's a connection there. Very strong one, very deep one. Walking around the playground on my own, why? Well, if you think about it, if you have a sensory overload for 2 hours, we do want some downtime. That was the reason why I was walking around the playground on my own. Wasn't the fact that I didn't want to socialise. I'd had a load of social input in the class, so I needed downtime. And what I used to do is I used to walk around the perimeter of the playground, recharging my batteries to go back into the class. But of course, people were making issues. He's not socialising. He looks at the ground. Well, the reason why I looked at the ground is because the world was so visually fragmented. To dull it, I would just look at the ground. So they were building up, again, all these assumptions of what they were seeing, but what was going on behind it was different. And also, because they thought I was retarded, the playground staff used to speak about me, but I could hear what they were saying. I didn't look like I could hear what I was saying. I didn't look probably like, to them, I could do much. But I heard what they were saying about me and my parents, and it wasn't very nice. So there are a lot of assumptions made. And in year 4, one of worst things that ever happened to me was a teacher stopping all the class, and she clapped all the class to stop, and she said, "Everyone look at Paul." So all the kids were looking at me, and she made me walk in a line, and then clapped afterwards, very patronising. Apparently the logic behind that was it was to help me walk. I don't think that is going to help me do anything, but it certainly made me more introverted than I already was. I made an association that was bad. And she said something to my parents again. She said, well, children pick up things at home. You know, she's made, again, this assumption that something is going on at home that is making me behave like that. So the problem is again, I go back to it, not being diagnosed and just getting this build up of assumptions of why these behaviours are being shown. And actually what's happening is I'm just being myself. I'm just being my normal. Do you see? My normal is autism. There's nothing wrong with that. But everybody was putting these abnormal signs onto me and my parents, so of course I was going to go into myself further because it was safer. So, and bullying in year 6 as well, that was pretty horrendous because this lady I'm convinced was a sociopath. If you think about it, sociopathic people actually go into work placements where they can control, don't they? And one of the best places you can go to is a school. Yeah? Yeah? So sociopathic people and psychopathic people are usually caricatured in horror movies. They wear masks, they've got knives, and they seem to be impervious to bullets. Has anybody seen Halloween and the ridiculous amount of sequels that were made? He never dies, does he? It's such an autie-friendly film because it's so predictable. He's going to be back in the next sequel, isn't he? Yeah, he is. He's not really going to die, is he? No, he isn't. No, but just no. These sorts of people like power. People talk about autistic people lacking empathy. Well, actually, these people generally lack empathy because they want to hurt people. And the way she used to hurt me is always pick me out, always pick me out, always pick me out. But she wasn't. But bullies are cowards. So when my dad used to come to the school, she would sort of shrink. Because my dad's about 6'4", and she knew she couldn't mess around with it. It's quite nice to see her get a taste almost of her own medicine when he came through the door. But yeah, she knows. She knows. She actually spoke to my dad recently, actually, in a gym, and she was very embarrassed because she didn't know I had autism, and he told her, and she was very embarrassed. So she should be. So what goes around comes around, I suppose. But yeah, that made me very ill, and I had to go to CAMHS, and the problem is at CAMHS in the mid-90s, my diagnostician told me this, and it is true, is that they had a problem with labelling children. Labelling children would destroy their lives. Now this is historical, CAMHS have improved, but during the time I went there, it wasn't good to slap a label on a child. I don't like the word label. I always think of Paddington Bear at the train station with a label. It's meaningless. But what they did actually diagnose with autism without saying it. So I had this massive observational sheet which I recently looked through. I asked for my notes, and speech problems, generalisation issues, all our social problems. And I've already answered that question. It's the ethos that CAMHS had. And sadly, they went down the psychoanalytic route. Oh, his parents were depressed. Oh, maybe that's had an effect on Paul. Duh, they're autistic like me. That's why they're depressed like me. I am not depressed because of their depression. They kept going. I wasn't aware of it. But do you see how really what they were saying for autism without actually saying it was? How frustrating is that? But that was the pathway that was laid out. and they were saying I had problems with articulated speech and not kind of knowing how to generalise situations. I'm sure you can relate to that, porting over information from one situation to another, and it screws my brain up even now. I have to be told in detail about that, even at my age. I just cannot do it automatically. Next slide, please. So my teenager years, bullying by students and teachers by literally the first week. I was being bullied, got severe anxiety. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, the crossover with autism and OCD is 30%. Pretty high, isn't it? It started off the classic sort of OCD, the hand washing, fear of germs. And I used to spend ages washing my hands. And I remember once I did it, and there was, because I have problems with recognising pain and heat. So there was these plumes and plumes of smoke, and the students saying, "Paul, what are you doing?" "Oh, washing my hands." With scalding water, because I had to wash it about, I think it's about 12 times, and the whole day would be fine. I was in and out of reception just crying, because I just couldn't cope with it. And the reason why I couldn't cope with it is I couldn't verbalise my emotions. I had speech. I'm going to talk about that later. The fancy word is alexithymia. And I'm going to go into that later. It's about that disconnection between a bodily feeling and an emotional feeling, and the disconnection between the two. So what I'd say was, the first thing that came into mind, "Oh, I've got a tummy ache." But actually what I was saying, "I'm hurting, I'm depressed," but I couldn't. Does that make sense? Have you ever had that happen to your child, where they're emotionally internal, but they'll spout out a physical problem?
Yeah.
Like, my eyes are wet, or my tummy hurts, or I feel a bit weak, I feel a bit strange, but not actually getting to what is really going on. Learning profile not understood. So how could I learn? If my learning profile wasn't understood, my communication profile wasn't understood, my sensory profile wasn't understood. So when I was sitting in classes, I just couldn't receive information, so I couldn't learn. But I got used to it, just going to the back of the class and just going into a daydream. In fact, it's in my notes. Paul daydreams a lot. Well, wouldn't you? Couldn't understand what the teacher was saying. You just drift off. Meeting with teachers, that would happen a lot. Paul isn't doing this properly. Paul isn't doing that properly. Again, same sort of issues at secondary school as at primary school. What I want people to learn from my early years, this is what shouldn't happen. This is what I want people to get out of this first half of the speech. We need to stop these things happening to our young children with autism, so they can have a better foundation for meaningful opportunities. I'm a strong believer in that. Abuse at 16 years old, that was traumatic. That came in flashbacks very recently, a few years ago, sexual abuse. And I know where it happened and how it happened and what happened. I'm not going to go too much into it because it's quite uncomfortable for me, but it did happen. Has anybody heard of false memory syndrome? It's a part of dissociating. There's a crack that gets filled with a false memory. It's almost like a scab gets unpicked, and then the real memory comes out, and you get a realisation of what really happened. And you know, like soldiers who come back from war, and they get flashbacks to certain incidents of gore and horror. That's how it came out. It's like this demon chasing after me. It's very horrific. But I'm glad I recognised it and can put it to rest. I believe in looking at the positives. And actually, autistic people are vulnerable to that sort of abuse, if you think about it. If they're not reading body language, tone of voice, predators can come in quite quickly and take advantage. Clinical depression and failing GCSEs. I was very intelligent, although it wasn't shown in a typical way. So people assumed I was thick and stupid. So in the end, by the time 2002 finished, I just wanted to get out of school. I didn't care. I mean, I got predicted an A star in history and got an F because I just couldn't cope with being in that world anymore. So college gets a bit positive, more positive here. almost get sick of hearing me saying about all the negative, but I think you need to learn that in order to build and make sense of the other stories I've got, which are far more positive. The best educational year was from 2002 to 2003. Wasn't diagnosed with autism, but it was the best educational year. It was at Rycote College. It used to be famous for its woodwork in Tame. I don't know if you're aware of that, you're probably not. But it was famous for its woodwork. It's turned into a cul-de-sac now, which is a blooming shame. But there you go. You have structure, one-to-one learning, revising and model structure, small class numbers, about 5 people in the class, low stimulus, simple direct language. And all these things, it made me realise, oh, I can learn, oh, I can do, I can achieve. Of course, it was already there, but nobody tapped into my sensory or communication profile. So it wasn't that it was non-existent, it's just that the pathway that was being put on me at secondary and primary school wasn't the pathway that I needed. This time of my life, it proof is in the pudding because I got a Student of the Year award. I'm very proud of that because it showed that I can achieve because the right things were put in place. And outcomes are good if you look at the child or the adults, or the teenager's sensory profile and, and I've made an error. What to lean in from this? It's just a complete, this is my dyslexia coming out, it makes no sense to me. What to learn from this, so just cover this and what to learn from this is autistic people, whether they're non-verbal, whether they're learning disabled, whether they're not learning disabled, wherever they are on the spectrum, they deserve to have a chance and to have the same opportunities as other folk. The same social opportunities, the same educational opportunities tailored for them. Because this world is tailored for people as well. You may not think it, but if you think about a classroom in a mainstream setting, it's going to be catered for mainstream students. That makes sense, doesn't it? So why can't some places be tailored for autistic people? That would make sense as well. And then you'll get the best out of them. Next slide, please. So the employment years, oh, that was a joy. 2002 to 2008. Just going over here, I'm filming myself for an organisation in America. I'm very proud to be doing so. I'll just go over there. It's not that I'm anal about keep touching it. There is a reason.
Paul, can I just point out you still haven't had your diagnosis?
Oh, no. Still a few years away yet. Supermarket years, that was funny. I actually asked a specialist, what's the worst place to work for an autistic person? He said a supermarket. And he was damn right. You have fluorescent lights, you have too much stimulus, gossip, load of small talk, too much meaningless interactions, pointless tasks, no sort of obvious route. It's a very strange place, very ambiguous place. But I'm glad I've done it because I learned about life. I am glad I went to a supermarket. It wasn't the best place in the world, but I did learn about life, which is very important for autistic people to sometimes learn a bit about life. Just the way I've done it was just booted, you get job. Yeah, but I appreciate looking back what it done because it opened my awareness up of people and different environments. Of course, I have to say this, my own personal autistic-friendly supermarket, of course, would have no people. The lights would be off, and I'd be obsessively stacking and checking every piece of food and, any product. I'd just obsessively be lining up in a darkened supermarket with nobody in it. That would be my ideal supermarket. Of course, that isn't real life, is it? But yeah, that would be my ideal supermarket. I mean, it even got down to the point where I didn't understand when I used to be on the delicatessen. I used to slice 12 slices of luncheon meat, and I'd get angry if someone wanted 2 slices because it would spoil the symmetry of what I'd just made, and they destroyed it. So that was my lack of awareness of understanding that he or she has a right to buy that. And I'd sometimes get annoyed and get a bit angry, which isn't right. I'm not going to condone sometimes I would get off hand, particularly when people would ask me to do things that were out of my routine. Like when I was on the deli, I'd have my set routine to clean the deli, and someone would say, more bread, and it'd just throw me, but I'm cleaning. More bread, but I'm cleaning. More bread, but I'm cleaning. I need to clean. I've sprayed it with all these chemicals. You don't want any people having a bitter tasting Danish, do you? If I'm a chemical soaked Danish, no. So that was problems I had. I didn't understand hierarchy, which isn't always necessarily a bad thing, because autistic people just see people. And there's a purity to that. The Queen came in the room, I'll treat her just the same as I'll treat you, because at the end of the day, she's flesh and blood. I don't care if she's got a tiara on her head or what, she's still a human being. Problem is, if you don't get gossip or small talk or body language, and hierarchy as well can be blurred. I got to see Ian, but Ian was Ian, but apparently everybody said to me he's my line manager. Oh, he's just Ian. You see, get into trouble because I talk to him like anyone else, and sometimes that throws some managers, because you're talking to me as if I'm like the lower echelons of staff. You must talk to me with a bit of respect. But of course, you have to tell the autistic person that there are these rules. They don't instinctively know them. I've got a funny story about not understanding gossip. Do you know why I don't understand gossip? And my theory is why a lot of autistic people don't understand gossip. It has no journey. It's just meaningless. It doesn't make sense. Why do people do it? I used to go up and spend an hour listening to meaningless rubbish. Go back down again and feel absolutely drained. People talking about next door neighbour's hedge being cut, or someone having a haircut, or someone someone was talking about a sex life. I thought, well, if you're going to do that, just leave it at home, because that's where it's done. Don't bring it to the table and start. Oh my goodness. I felt sometimes like an agony aunt. A really strange experience, people talking about some really strange things. I should have said, can I have some money please, after the 15 minutes, and trying to give him advice, and it got very strange. But the gossip thing, I can remember talking to a lady, and she's probably given me all these social signals about a gentleman who's talked too much, and he went on and on. This was a fellow member of staff. Now, I was seeing this as information that was valuable. So the gentleman came into the room, and I turned to him and I said, oh, we've just been talking about you. And you go on and on. And I thought that was valuable information that he needed to know. But apparently he's very upset about it. He thought I was very rude. So here's the problem. I'm not actually understanding that his feelings were being hurt, and that the subtext that she was using was gossip. There was secret signals going on. This is just between you and me. You don't relay it out. Do you see how autistic people get into trouble by not understanding those social niceties about sometimes telling white lies, sometimes just thinking, is it worth it to say, and taking a step back? And that was a problem. Some autistic people work in a team in a different way. Sometimes the classic teamwork thing is very social, isn't it? But sometimes the way I contributed to the team was slightly detached, but just as valuable. I remember managers going up to me and said, this is teamwork, this is teamwork. And I said, I am a part of the team. And I was contributing to the team, but in a different way. Not in a way he thought, which isn't his fault, because he has every right to say it, but not in a way he thought that was right. So you clash a lot. And being bullied, that was a problem. Being bullied, I was called, in that job, I had to leave after 5 years because I was so ill, because people thought I was thick, weird, stupid, strange. A former member of staff told me all this. They all thought I was weird and odd and freakish because of the way I behaved. There was a lot of gossip about me. But do you know what? I was actually a damn good worker. I never actually thought to say that I was actually efficient. I kept to rules. I checked things. When there were checklists, I followed them through. When things had to be cleaned, I loved cleaning the deli. It was shined and cleaned to, see my face in it because I enjoyed it. I was contributing. But the way in which they were looking at it from a social model. Sometimes I wonder if work is actually 90% social and 10% work. What I was doing is probably 1% social and 99% work. I'm not saying neurotypical people are lazy. What I'm saying is they can. No, I'm not. Honestly, that wasn't. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that you know how to juggle both. Like if I wanted to concentrate on being social, I would concentrate so much on being social that I'd forget to work. And that did happen a few times where they would say, interact a bit more, and I'd do it, but they'd say, but you're not working. So I could never get it right. It'd be one, it's that black and white thinking, isn't it? One or the other. I couldn't quite meet that middle ground, which was a problem. And they used to make me do questionable jobs, I think deliberately, to make me look silly. One of them, because of my legs and how I walked, I had an odd gait, they would always make me do the trolleys because I found it awkward. Do you see? And one day they made me clean it's actually in my book, this old passageway at the back of the store. And it's basically where loads of drunks went. And I'd no protection on my hands. There was all sorts down there. There was urine, there was sperm. It was disgusting. It was a cesspit. And I was picking up all this stuff. And what really scared me, and people, been urinating, having sex there, I found one of those plastic syringe things that really scared me. And I thought, but I can't, what if there's a needle? And I actually said to one of the managers, but I found this. Oh, it doesn't matter. So sometimes there's a gullibility to please with autism, and I do some of the most silly jobs just to gain pleasure that I was doing something right. I remember they made me clean the tobacco out of poles. Now, how I explain that is you had a rusty pole with tobacco but stuffed to the brim, and it stank. And what I would do is I'd pour hot water down it and plunge at all it was disgusting. And they would be probably just laughing at me doing this, spending hours and hours doing it. I suppose there is a positive to that. I was on my own. But, come on, my job title wasn't a cleaner. And I actually challenged him on that. I said, I'm not a cleaner. And he didn't like it. There are times where being direct does help. I'm not a cleaner. If I was, I would be doing that. So be careful when your children go into the workplace, just hear what they're saying. Because the way my mum used to gauge something was wrong, when I didn't even think there was, by what I was saying, she'd piece together the clues. Because sometimes I wouldn't see them. She'd talk about certain people, she said, do you think you should be talking to him, Paul? And she would know without not even seeing him. Because it's that fear of mind, isn't it? So just be aware when they go to workplaces that they need support. They need a buddy. They need someone there just to keep an eye on things so they don't go through what I went through, because it's very serious. And the same problems happen throughout work, just getting bullied and bullied and bullied. And it was getting to a point I was thinking, well, can I even work? Because every time I go to work, there's always problems. The best thing I've done, and I don't think there's any shame in this, is voluntary work. People are a bit snobby about that, who I've spoken to. I don't think there's anything wrong with voluntary work, because work is work. I enjoyed actually doing voluntary work. And when I went to St Andrews Base, about 2008, I finally found my niche, because I finally was around people who A, accepted me as a human being, and B, accepted me for my skills. It took that long, yet I value it, for people to actually recognise my skills within my autism. And what I could do was connect with these children, these primary school children, and give tips and advice how to help them. So can you see how me becoming a speaker was already, the seeds were being sown there, that actually I could do something worthwhile and beneficial finally after years and years of jobs where I wasn't appreciated. Next slide, please. So misdiagnosis, mental health professional not understanding my issues. That was really, really interesting. When I went through mental health, he didn't listen. And I said to him, I think I've got autism. And he would sort of look at me and sort of write stuff down, but not say anything. And I kept saying it, but I think I've got autism. Oh, well. And then he started saying, oh, well, you do have a complex personality. I said, but I think it's autism, but you have a complex personality. What's that? Oh, you have a complex personality. You know, I was even giving him Tony Attwood's book, Guide to AS, and I actually filled out the diagnostic criteria and ticked it off. I said, here you go. You know, can't diagnose himself. I'm supposed to do that. You know, and he didn't like it that I kept using the A word. It was almost like I was swearing at him. Autism. And he wasn't and I said all my developmental issues. And you know what he said? They said he doesn't fit the criteria for autism because he doesn't display repetitive behaviours. You should see me at home, mate, where I'm flapping and stimming. Then you would see all those repetitive behaviours, which I still do. I still flap and stim and rock and do all those behaviours I'd done when I was younger. I can just put a lid on them now, but it's very hard for me to do so at this moment. Never ever punish stimming. Never. I'll go into that later, but it's a part of who the person is. So misdiagnosis, I remember going to this diagnosis, said finally we're going to diagnose you. And I thought, oh great, brilliant. And we sat down, it's like Bugs Bunny, what's that, Doc? Well, I think you have Asperger's traits with complex personality, and we all sort of looked at him, and we looked at each other, and my mum was the first to pipe up, what's that? Well, he has a few Asperger traits, a complex personality because of being bullied at school. The reason why I've been bullied at school, you've almost got to reverse it. Because of misdiagnosed autism. But no, he's going down a personality disorder route. And when I was discharged, that was nice of him, telling me his wishy-washy diagnosis, which done a lot of damage, because I didn't know where to put myself. Do you see that fried my brain and my parents? And the problem was with that is that self-recognition wasn't complete. So discharged me after telling me that, which I didn't agree with, because I still needed help. But I think the truth of the matter was, I don't think he reflects all of mental health. I'm not going to say that because there are some wonderful people in mental health. But I think this particular individual just didn't know what to do with me. So it was easier to just discharge me. And I looked, and he had been diagnosed with me with 5 different personality disorders. And I looked through them. It was schizotypal, borderline, anarchistic, obsessive compulsive, personality disorder, paranoia, and all sorts of diagnoses. May have had some of them. I think the 2 I did have, because you can have autism and PDs that can coexist. The schizotypal and borderline came about from just bullying. And I know there's controversy. Can you have a personality disorder with autism? Of course you can. With autism, you have a personality. But usually things have to get to a certain pitch for them to start to develop. And then they sort of overlap and mimic the autism. So what's the PD and what's the autism? And he didn't know. So he just kept throwing these PD diagnoses happening, not literally, because what I would have done is grab them and put them up from back in. You know, so this is the danger of when you go to a professional who, again, I would have valued his opinion if he'd have said, I don't know. But I can take you to someone who does know. It would have helped them. Next slide, please.
Paul, just to say you're getting your own back because we're now training mental health in the
area. Yes, excellent. So formal diagnosis, finally, it was like the heavens and St. Peter's gates opened. And I formally got a diagnosis in 2010 of autism and OCD. That was the best experience I ever had because firstly it was a really nice, friendly diagnostician. It put my faith back into psychiatrists and psychologists by meeting him because the way he'd done the diagnosis was like speaking to a friend, and it was done like that. It was conversational, it was productive, it wasn't negative, it was well done. And I believe that is why, another reason why I have a positive perception of my autism, because of the way in which he spoke about it, the fact that he wanted to meet my family, and the fact that actually I recognised it in my mum and dad. You can tell my dad's autistic, can't you? Look, scared look. Whereas my mum's hiding it a bit better there. But yeah, you can see in the eyes, can't you? He's a young man, they're both in their 20s. And they got diagnosed around the same time, so it's a family recognition. My mum got diagnosed with atypical autism, sometimes called PDD, pervasive developmental disorder. Basically, I'm sure you're aware of the triad of impairments, aren't you? Yes? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, she only fits 2. So that's when you qualify for an atypical autism diagnosis, or PDD, or even more long, we even do PDD-NOS. Pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise. Oh dear. I prefer atypical autism personally, but I'm sure you're aware that I'm not going to go into it too much, but over the waters in America, the DSM-5 are changing, aren't they? Asperger's and PDD to social and communication disorder. And I like what Temple Grandin, she said, well, it's a load of rubbish because that is autism. I like the way how she speaks sometimes. Cuts through it, doesn't she? And my grandfather the following year got diagnosed at 83, so it just proves you're never too old to get a diagnosis. He got diagnosed with Asperger's, and when we went there, he said, "Oh, that's why I'm like I am." You know, made sense to him. That's why I'm like I am. And he taught. I say in my book, he talks about 4 things and 4 things only: football, politics, gardening, weather, and that's it. So get him onto football, politics, gardening, and weather, and you have a conversation. Anything else, you don't know. He won't. He will go with it, but he just won't connect. And he has a diary, which I think is so sweet. He calls it his diary, but it's a very Aspie diary. It's not full of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. It's just figures about the weather and how much water's come down. It's he calls it, I'm just going to fill out my diary. I thought, what have you been doing today? Oh, 23 Fahrenheit. Right, water gauge, 2 millimetre. Oh, right, so it's not the sort of diary I thought it was. And my dad's got, certain interest with gardening as well. And actually what I say about, because my nan's autistic as well, with their relationship, I almost say they are alone together. I think years and years ago, there was more structure in roles. And what he does is he does his structured role outside, and she does it inside, and she's got all her routines, and he's got his all routines, and they come together to eat and depart. So they're sort of alone together. It's not a defective marriage, it's actually a very good one. They're very loyal and loving to each other. It's just they show it in different ways. They're not all huggy and kissy, but they love each other dearly. And the same with my parents as well. They don't always hug and embrace, but I know they love each other. Do you see? Yeah, so it's not the fact. And also what my mum said, which I really valued, is in 2010 she said, I finally found my son when I got diagnosed. Some people say, and I can understand this when some parents get an early diagnosis, they feel they've lost the child. Oh, what is it? I don't know if anybody can help me. They've lost the child they thought they were going to have. And I can't fully understand that. That's not because of a lack of empathy, it's because it's out of my experience, but I can certainly see why you would say that. But with my parents, because of a different sort of pathway, she finally thought she found me with that diagnosis. It fitted. It all puzzle came together. So yes, next slide, please. So Autism Oxford. This is where things get better, okay? This is where I finally found my niche. I finally found that there was something I could do which was meaningful to society and to other people. And one of my main drives is, as I've said during my speech, is that I don't want people to go through what I went through. I don't want children to go through what I went through. I don't want parents to go through what they went through, my parents, because it doesn't need to happen. So my first speech in 2010 was a 10-minute speech. I didn't know it would mount to 2-hour speeches, but it built up from there. And I do different topics and broaden out what I spoke about. And now I do speeches and training and consultancy because these two things are understood. This is the first job for Autism Oxford where I feel I'm understood as a person, and also my autism is understood as well. It goes hand in hand, my personality and my autism, and then I can progress. And that really does make logical sense, doesn't it, with the children that you have and adults and teenagers, that if those things are understood, it makes sense that things are going to progress, aren't they? If both those aspects are understood. And of course it's improved my mental health and self-worth immensely. That kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it? That if you're understood, like if any human being is understood, you're going to feel happier, aren't you, in yourself? Next slide. So fruit salad. This bit I will explain and give examples. This is fancy words, a lot of neurology. Donna Williams coined the term fruit salad in 1995 when she became a consultant. Has anybody seen Donna speak? Yeah. She's good, isn't she? Excellent lady. And basically this fruit salad is something she wrote firstly in a book called Autism, Inside Out Approach, and almost a sequel, as I like to call it, The Jumble Jigsaw in 2005, and they're excellent books. It's basically piecing together what autism is, how it works, what isn't autism as well, because I think that's just as important, what are the co-conditions you can have with autism, and how these pieces affect perception. So how I perceive the world because of these. The positive aspect of these is people may say, oh, you're talking about what you can't do, but the thing is, what you can learn from what you find difficult is what you can do, or finding ways around it. So that's the way I like to look at this. So the emotional processing issues is alexithymia, which is self-emotional processing. It's reflective processing. It's about that connectivity between how you feel. Have you had examples with your sons and daughters where, out of context of time and space, they've had a meltdown that doesn't connect with what's going on at the time? There's no obvious connections. Yes or no? Yes. Yeah. Well, it could be this, and it's 85% prevalence on the spectrum. So this is high, where you get a disconnection between an emotional response and a physical response. I'm always a day behind in my emotions, so I can intellectually reason that you're good people and I'm happy, but I won't feel that until tomorrow morning when I wake up in the hotel. Do you see how that works? Yeah? And if they're really, really intense emotions, they can take years. I didn't understand I was being bullied in my first job until from that point of it happening, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, it hit me. So all those emotions from those 3 years hit me in a wave in one night. Of course I started crying, wouldn't you? Like a tidal wave of emotional energy. And it's this disconnection between emotions and able to verbalise them because they may not be there yet. Imagine a very old laptop and you're trying to download a file. Imagine that file is an emotion. It's going to get there in the end, but it's going to take longer. It's just going a bit slower, the processing. You see that? So give it time. Because I know it's frustrating when you ask your sons and daughters, how are they? And they say, I don't know. Has that happened? I don't know how I feel. And that may be it. It's just the disconnectivity between an emotional response and the physical response. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah. So social emotional agnosia. This is, agnosia is just a fancy word. It's a Latin word, I think, agnosis. It's blindness, neurological brain blindness. So think of the brain, right, when you're thinking of autism, and also the body as well. So that's to do with what I said about not understanding the gossiper. I wasn't seeing the facial expressions. I wasn't seeing the eyes. I wasn't seeing the body. And that there were meaning behind it. It's a blindness to body language. And the way you have to learn it is not through intuition, but by being taught. It's a different way of learning. As Temple Grandin says, you can be taught things. It's just a pathway. So does that connect where you try and be subtle, but it's just not getting there? My mum says sometimes, Paul, when you go on and on, I raise my eyebrows, I flicker my eyes, and still you go on. And I say, well, all you've got to do is tell me to be quiet, and that'll be fine. It's nice and clear. I'm not going to get offended. I need to be told. Do you see that? No, but I'm not condoning being rude, because that's just not going to get anybody anywhere. In fact, it's going to create more barriers. I've seen that happen where you just butt in heads. It's really not very good. So visual processing problems here, all these problems here, Smalt agnosia, that's object blindness. So when I was a young child, and it still affects me now, it's to do with these lenses. Without these lenses, I only see pieces of things, never wholes. So my visual field is just pieces. If you imagine a pixelated image that you keep pixelating and pixelating and pixelating until it becomes raw blocks of colour. And that is how I see the world. So it made sense when I was younger that I was kinesthetic. And I see a lot of children that do that get written off as retarded and all sorts of awful words, because they're not talking and they seem to be touching and sniffing and licking and tapping and mouthing. But if you think about it, if you can't see visuals alone through sight alone, semantic agnosia is meaning blindness. You need to touch to perceive. Is it rough? Is it smooth? How does it connect? How do I know this person if I feel the face, if I smell the hair? Have you had that done where they like to feel faces and they smell parts of your body? Have you had all that? It's all to do with communication and their sensory profile. And this is how I work. I still work like that, and of course I'd like to do that to all of you here, because I would get a true representation of you. And if I wanted to understand this room, I'd do all those behaviours, but I can guarantee as soon as I go out of this room today, I will forget it. I do not have a visual memory. I'm not Miss Temple Grandin, who's got an amazing photographic visual memory. I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I don't have a visual memory. I don't think in pictures. I don't think in words. I think very much like Donna. Have you heard Donna say about patterns and themes? That is how I think. How things feel. Do you know how I know the colour green? Do you know how I know the colour green? Leaf. Leaf. Feel. Do you know how I know the colour purple? plumb. How it feels. Do you see the kind of world I'm living in? Does that make sense?
Yes.
It only happened recently that I understood, because I can differentiate colours, but I don't understand what they are. And as soon as I made that connection with green leaf, I see green. It's odd. I'm not colourblind in the sense that I live in monochrome, but do you see how it just a light bulb moment? Yeah? Yeah? And you also get some of these autistic people who love messy play. So water, paints. I remember I always used to be, I never used to paint properly. Always used to just get all the paints and make all different colours. I used to sift sand through my hands just over and over again. I used to mould Play-Doh over and over again. I used to tip water into litre bottles with pinprick holes and just skim and flap at the water and feel it. You see cats doing that, don't you? Sensory based, isn't it? When they see water coming out of the tap, they go like this, don't they? I've got a funny story about a cat. Because of these problems, because I don't see with meaning, and I still don't. I mean, this generalising an image, which is lovely, so I can see all the lovely faces and etc. etc. But when I was young, and my mum looked out the window, and I felt this sort of soft thing. I went like that, and it felt really good, and I started going like this. And I thought, this is nice, this feels good. And the problem was, it was a cat. And it looked like I lacked empathy. Of course, I didn't know it was a cat. And by God, that cat never came back into our back garden ever again. Having its back broken. So it was because I wasn't connecting. I remember once going into the field and picking up a mole. Has anybody felt a mole? It's not the thing you usually do every day, is it? But they feel like velvet. And it was just that sensory thing. So the world in which I live in is very sensory based still, even though up here sort of very Aspie-ish. There's still a lot of that autism, that classic autism driving this behind all the gears that are chugging it. I'll go into that a bit later. So prosopagnosia face blight. So I haven't put the two little things there. Oh well. Basically, that's to do with I don't remember faces. I can't process a face. If I was to look at face, it would just shift. It was almost break apart like a mirror cracked. It's too complicated for me to actually process a face. And what can happen there is you get some folks who say, you go up to, they say, hello, how are you? And do I know you? Have you ever had that? I don't know you. And the only way I used to recognise people is through haircuts. Well, hair changes. People lose it, people colour it, have it up, have it down. But so if it changed, they're gone. I don't know them. I remember a bloke coming up to me, I thought he was a stalker, because he was saying how he knew me and how he'd seen me at all these meetings, and it wasn't until afterwards, before I got the glasses, he'd shaved his beard off. And I was really scared, really made me anxious. I thought, how does he know all this information about me? Oh dear. So can you see how that works? And depth perception problems. Yeah, I only see in 2D, I can't see in 3D. I only see flat. This helps a bit, these glasses, but I see flat, so I don't understand distance. So I can get fooled even now very easily. I can remember doing tests with a lady with Asperger's who was testing my depth. And even now, when she chucks a ball towards me, rather than making a logical sort of reasoning that the ball's coming nearer and I need to catch it, I think the ball's getting bigger. Because it's coming, do you see, it's getting bigger. Oh, you know. So that can happen. I remember going up to the top of this hill, and this was a few years ago, and it was like a big panorama of the village, big going, and I just sort of was confused by it, and I just kept going like this, because I didn't actually understand what it was and how far away it was. The truth was it was probably miles and miles away, but I just kept going like this, and it made my head swim. All the sensory information, it was making me quite high, so I was going like this, trying to touch it. So, and I remember when I went to, oh goodness me, London, and these were again without the glasses. London's very noisy, isn't it? Went to Paddington. Was it Paddington? I can't remember which station. And noise and visuals, and I was getting very, very confused by it all. And we had to go to a particular station, and I was losing meaning visually and auditory. So I stepped onto this thing, and I just felt like I was going to drop 90 feet. It was a silvery, shiny thing. And the lady turned to me and she said, "What's wrong?" I said, I don't like this. She said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, I feel like I'm going to drop, because I wasn't actually computing that I was actually on an escalator. So my depth perception completely went. I thought if I was going to put my foot out, I was just going to keep tumbling down and down and down. I was trying to gain meaning through sound, because I could feel my comprehension going. So I was crashing, basically, but you wouldn't know, because I just put a lid on it. I was trying to gain meaning by putting my making sound and the sound back into my ear, trying to get some sort of meaning where I was. And I get a bit trippy. I mean, I'm rather lucky because I don't have to spend any money on LSD. I just have to take this glass off. And it is like a trip. It is trippy. And these colours, and it's very nice sometimes when I'm in a really safe place. And this thing came towards me. It's just this blur of tubes and colours and reflections. It was no comprehension. And I went into it, and then it was sometime afterwards that I realised it was a train. But I didn't understand it was a train. I had no visual. You see what it means about not having visual memory and having fragmented visuals. Now, if I could touch that train and feel it, of course it took ages and people think I'm mad. But that is what it would take for me to gain a reasonable understanding of its dimensions. I'm thinking outwardly, not inwardly. Temple thinks inwardly, doesn't she? She creates visuals in her head and then creates them along the reverse. Do you see? It's a reverse. I have to touch to feel and gain meaning, not the other way around. She's excellent. I guess the reason why I like Temple is because she's the complete opposite to me. I love hearing about how she thinks. It's amazing, isn't it? The Stairway to Heaven. I mean, amazing lady. So does that make sense about sometimes what you're seeing? You may see a lot of flapping in front and trying to touch and all. Is that giving you a meaning to what you're seeing? Yeah? Yes or no? Yes. So I know Wendy does that, doesn't she, Wendy Lawson? It's just that I need that verbal feedback of are we on the same level. So auditory processing problems. This is probably why people thought I was silly. And I've got these auditory agnoses here. It's meaning deafness. And basically, meaning deafness means that receptively, I can pick up only very small amounts of language. That's why Mary said that at the start. And what will happen is, as you talk to me, it'll start off as language, and then it'll start going down into sounds, trickling, until all you're saying to me is a load of sounds. So it's like comprehension, but it's reversing. It's going back. Do you see it? Yeah? So sometimes very clipped, very succinct language benefits people who need it. I'm not very literal, like a lot of Aspers are, that semantic pragmatic issue with language, where it's very literal. But what I do have a problem with how much language I can take. That's my problem, meaning deafness. So can you see why, going back to my college years, why it was beneficial? Clipped, succinct language worked with me, because then I knew what I was doing. And auditory agnosia, environmental auditory agnosia, means that I don't have a comprehension of sounds environmentally, so I get scared. and it's a limbic system. You know that comprehension filter? It's that bit where you gain comprehension. It's just a bit loose. So when I hear sounds, it doesn't matter how many times I hear them, people have to tell me what they are. It's like Groundhog Day. So you get autistic people who jump for two reasons. Firstly, they've got heightened sound, how the pain, the physical pain. But they may have, not all, a secondary problem. What is it? And I remember getting really anxious about this noise going on outside, and Faye, one of the trainers, said, don't worry, Paul, it's a strimmer. Now, if you'd heard that strimmer again, would you sort of comprehend that was a strimmer? Yeah. See, I don't. I have to keep being told, keep being told, keep being told, because I get scared. Because I don't, it could be a bomb, for all I know. I get scared when I hear noises outside of my house, because what is it? What's going on? Do you see that? Panicking. Does that relate to any, running out to check what that sound is? What's that? What's going on? And it looks like being a bit sort of, not rude, but just annoying. But actually there's a genuine neurological reason. What I'm trying to do with all this is give you a neurological basis to the behaviours you're seeing. Do you see how that's working? Yes. So tonal agnosia, I don't understand tone. So I have problems with understanding inflection. And you can get a lot of meaning, can't you, from inflection? So say what you mean, not what you don't mean. Because as soon as you say what you don't mean, but you mean the opposite, I remember a big mistake a teacher done. She said, look, it's just like a hairdryer, and it was a hand wash, so what was he going to do? He's going to put his head, the top of his head, you know how hot that is? And I said, oh no, don't do that, because he thought it was the same. He heard hairdryer. Oh, it's just like a hair, oh, so it must be then. Because just like is hard to compute, but it's either like or not like. And something Richard Maguire says about this, being tone deaf, don't use negatives with autistic people. Have you seen Richard Maguire? Was it last year? Did he come here? I could be wrong, but he said negatives are hard to compute for autistic people. So I don't. Oh, I'm trying to think of an example because I'm tone deaf.
I didn't say she stole that. That's what we used, don't we?
Yeah, I didn't say she stole my money. That didn't just completely froze me. The didn't bit. I can't manage it. What's didn't? It's just hard, and I often make social mistakes when people use negatives. Have you noticed that, where they get it the wrong way round when you use a negative? Because it's the tone, isn't it? And what you're implying with the didn't isn't picked up. You have to almost word it a completely different way because they're not getting the tone. I didn't say she stole my money. Well, that's got 7 different meanings, hasn't it? For me, it's got 1. I didn't say she stole my money. You see how difficult it is? I've got 7 chances. Roll the dice. I may get it right, may not. But again, it's down to communication profile here. Are they literal thinkers? Are they meaning deaf? Are they both? Do they have visual problems or don't they? Because I can tell you now that PECS wouldn't have worked for me because I'm so object and meaning blind. Give me, show us your PECS. What does that mean? Do you see? So all profiles are different. That's what I'm trying to say. What will work for one will not work for the other, and vice versa. So has this helped? Yes? Yes.
Paul, I think a good example of meaning deafness is once we went to London and we were waiting at the station for a train, and the first time a fast train shot through, as it was coming, I thought, well, I need to warn Paul. And I said, Paul, there's a fast train approaching. It's going to get really noisy. And I just sensed the next time another fast train came, I still had to tell you.
Yes.
I sort of presumed that, oh, he'll get it now. It's another fast train. And I thought, no, don't risk it. And,
Yeah.
I've learned so much through you. I had no idea that there was this level of you know, we've got other speakers that we train with, and they don't need that level of being told what the sounds are.
Yeah.
And the same with somebody's mobile phone going off. I would know, you would all know probably it's a mobile phone going. Paul wouldn't. He'd be thinking it's a fire alarm, or it could be anything.
Yeah.
So
it's a level of comprehension for our maths. So pain agnosia is to do with body disconnection. And can anybody relate to this? Has anybody got children that have scalding hot baths? You just do not know, and they come out pink and lightheaded. Yeah. This problem I had when I was younger, and one thing I do recommend is temperature gauging. You can get these fancy temperature gauges for your baths. Apparently they store people in places for people with learning disabilities as well. It's understanding heat and what too much heat does to the body. And what it does is it's actually scalding it, and your body's trying to tell you it's too hot. So if you don't have that connection there, it's water. Remember what I said about the OCD and the scalding hands? It's the same principle. Also being hurt. I don't understand. I remember a funny thing happened to me where someone punched me, elbowed me right in the mouth, and it bent my tooth back, right back. And I cried, not because of the pain, but because of the blood. So my mum accidentally dislocated my arm, so I was adamant I wasn't going to the fish and chip shop when it went pop. And I know it was limp, and I was worried about the symmetry it got, but this one doesn't. So you see, I was crying, not for the reasons that was thought. Have you ever had that, where they cut, and it looks awful, or they stub their toe, and you go, didn't that hurt? They go, no. you get, and also, I actually like going to the dentist, which sets people off, apparently, because I don't mind having extractions. I'm so pain dead that actually extractions feel rather good, because the actual level of sensory need is so high, in the sense that I need it, that when I get the grinding of a tooth, it doesn't bother me. And actually one of my favourite things to do is go to the dentist, because if you think about it, if you've got your pain threshold is like mine, they can do as much as they want and it doesn't hurt, so you want more. But you can get people on the other end of the spectrum who you have to check a tooth at a time, and also what can actually happen is it's more susceptible to rot, and basically because the bristles are so painful on the tooth, it's the other end where they're oversensitive, that these bristles will feel awful. So there can be problems with teeth. Does anybody relate to that? Not everybody. Which end is it? Is it the oversensitive? Yes, yeah. And the bristles and picking and also the fear. A dentist is quite a scary place. The lights and just what are they doing? Because you can't actually see what they're doing, can you? I like the day, because I'd be interested if I had anything done where I could see what they're at. I know that would scare a lot of people, but to me, I would really like that. And I tell you, the problem I've got with my teeth is they're oversensitive. Now, what I've done with my teeth is a complete reverse. I completely whittle, because I'll do it tonight, but I don't feel the amount of pressure I'm putting on the tooth. My teeth, you can't, you may be able to see, they're all receded, begun to recede. The enamel chipped off here, because I just do not, the pain receptivity is just not there. So my teeth are like old man's teeth, really, because they're so brittle and sensitive, because I overbrush. So I've got the opposite problem. They're brittle not because they're rotting, but because I'm just stripping away the enamel. Does this relate to anyone? Yeah? It's either one end or the other, isn't it? Not aware of body connectivity. Speech apraxia, that's something I had when I was younger. People with cerebral palsy can have this as well. It's where they find it really hard to articulate their words. Now, if you think about body dyspraxia, it's finding movements hard, isn't it? But if you think about it, the same thing's going on. You've got the muscle the muscles of the jaw and the tongue and the bone. And if you can't coordinate them properly, it's going to be hard to actually get words out and can become very frustrating. And I was frustrated when I was younger because I couldn't get the words out. So I used to make monosyllabic sounds because, if you think about it, they were easier than trying to string other syllables together because it took so much effort. Does that relate? Making sounds because of how their jaws moving. So developmental of speech and movement, echolalia, videos and video games, and I'm sure they'll quote things off video games and TV programs and cartoons, and I was no different. I would play. I'd use my play around echolalia. It wasn't a bad thing because my favourite film was Hook, and it was make-believe in some ways. I wore the tape out. This was the days before Blu-ray and DVD. I absolutely wore that tape out of Hook, particularly the ending where I was dressed up as Hook. And I would be echolalic. I'd echo what was going on. This is where I gained speech, and I'd be echopraxic. That's copying movements, praxia. So you can have both, where you're echoing sounds and speech, but you also echo movements. Have you seen that before? Well, they do a particular movement. It doesn't quite look like theirs. It looks like something they've seen. Yeah? And halalalia is something, funny enough, people with dementia get, where they get stuck on their own words and they just echo their own words. They don't come from something else like a radio program or TV, but they come from themselves and they just keep getting. Sometimes it can be, there's a lot of things going on. There could be anxiety, or because they like the sound. Particularly with me, I like the sound of words. May not understood what the word meant. I remember the most embarrassing thing I've done is say the F word in Blenheim Palace over and over again. I didn't understand what it meant, but it sounded nice. So that is a problem you can get into. And stimming. At home I stim and I flap and I rock and I do all sorts of... have I got my thing here? Oh, shall I? Thank you. And I use... where is it? Here it is. This, because I like colours and I've always liked colours. And I'll just use it and I'll just wave and flap and, that I'm in my world, I'm in my own space, I can do what I like, within reason, and that's something I do, love colours, and what I do is I'll just put this will relax me completely, because I want to be immersed with the colours, so the best way to do it is put it towards my eye. I just get very, very relaxed, and I flap and I stim and I rock, because I get a real buzz out of doing that as well, because as I was saying, that is very much still part of me. It hasn't stopped, it's just that I've learned how to at times put it on hold. But it's still there. I remember Donna Williams going to Tomley Hall. It's a place where we live, where autistic people go. And she was having a whale, she was in her 40s at the time, and she was stimming and flapping in the ball pit. She's having a whale of a time because she's just being herself. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that, and don't punish stimming. I've seen it a few times at places, and I think, why? There's a reason why they're doing it. There's always a reason why someone stims. Sometimes it's anxiety-based, sometimes it's pleasurable. It's getting into that neurology of why. What is going on when someone does this, or flapping, rocking, doing all sorts of repetitive movements like this. Sometimes I do this at home, because it's actually, because of my body connectivity, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's rhythmic, and it's got a rhythm, hasn't it? You can see it's got a rhythm. And does that relate to anyone, where they do things that seem to have rhythm? Yeah? Yeah, getting back into the world, or going out of it. It depends what its function is. Learning difficulties, dyslexia and dyscalculia, or what I like, an American lady with Asperger's, simplifies this much better, math, let's dyslexia, and his problems with maths, and I don't know if this can relate to anyone in the audience. Yeah, problems. They can coexist with autism. Of course, you can have all these on their own, which is that's what Donna's trying to say. When these fruit salads, all these little pieces, that you see in that journey that develop all the pieces of it. This is one person. This is me. This is my fruit salad, as she would call it. She's got her fruit salad, your son's got your, and you relate to some of it, and some of it could be completely different. Some may be dyspraxic and face blind, but not have object blindness. Do you see? Yeah. All the profiles are different. If you understand what the profile is, then you can start enabling them to learn. I wish someone was very, tactile with me when I was younger, kinesthetic with me, and it would have been so good if someone could have done that for me, because of the sensory-based learner I was. I would have got a lot out of the world. When you get somebody who's so hypersensitive to touch, actually touch is a no-go. Particularly, I remember Wendy Lawson said, even now, she's in her 60s, if someone lightly touches her, she has to really hold herself not to almost just go like that, because it's so painful. Other co-conditions, dissociation, DID, I won't go into too much of that. Donna Williams has talked a lot about dissociation. This isn't autism, but she says there is a strong correlation. Dissociation is to do with just going outside of yourself. And if you think about it with autism, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If the world's very difficult or you need time to escape, to dissociate is a very comforting thing. And certainly there are different levels of it. You can get post-traumatic stress disorder, you can get dissociative identity disorder where other personalities or alters are created to function, help the core self function. Very deep, I know, but that is a basic overview of that. So look out for that, because that wouldn't be echolalia unless the alter was echolalic. See, and the alter would have its own fruit salad and its own personality. And no, I'm serious. And Donna Williams has got DID, and she's got 15 alters. Yeah, and they're all chugging away. And if you actually look on her Facebook page, you notice how the style of her sentences change and different alters are coming out. It's very, very complicated. I've got 3. So she's got football teams where I've got 3. And the way they work, I've got female, male and a child. And they help me navigate through the world when the core self just finds it too tough, basically. They're my team. They help me. They enable me. So I don't see anything negative about it, because the end result is me getting out in the world. The people who I do feel sorry for with this, when they're on the spectrum or not, is when they're put in hospitals and they're put on drugs. And that can happen to people without this, just autism, just being put on antipsychotic drugs and all sorts of nastiness. So it's about understanding what is the autism and what isn't. It's important to understand both. Do you see? Yes.
Paul, can I just mention, you did a speech in Norfolk about a year ago, and at the end of it, I remember a clinical psychologist coming up and saying she'd recently diagnosed a man with Asperger's, and yet for years he'd been diagnosed schizophrenic. And apparently it was one question had got him that diagnosis, and it was, do you hear voices? And he said yes, because his way of processing what he'd heard in the day was to repeat speech that someone had made to him out loud, and that would help him to process it. And because that question was so literal, do you hear voices? It was his own voice repeating someone else. Do you see what I mean? Just saying yes to that one question got him a completely wrong, and put him on drugs that he shouldn't have been on. And and we're talking about now, not sort of 1950s when it was a lot worse. And so I think that's why it's so important that Paul's saying that some kids do need to repeat language out loud, and that could be misdiagnosed as hearing voices.
Next slide, please. So this is Donna Williams' Autism Asperger's Differences, which I like. It makes sense to me. A lot of people agree with it, some don't, but it's her observations, as she said, for being 15 years as a consultant and observing the different profiles. She says people with Asperger's, logical, literal, use the right-hand side of their brain to work out the world, internalise interpretation. And she said people with autism are less logical, less literal, using the left-hand side of their brain to work out the world, sensory-based, externalised kinesthetic. Now, and then also, there's another one, it's the in-betweeners. The people who sort of are in between the profiles, because autism isn't, what she calls it is an adjective for what is going on. Do you see? It's bits and bits of things that build up the autistic or Asperger's profile, and then you give it autism or Asperger's. I remember speaking to an Irish neurologist who, in years to come, believes that it won't even be called Asperger's or autism, it becomes something else because of how vast it is. We're learning, the more we learn, the more we don't know, and what should we call it? But at the moment, I'm fine with that. Where do I fit in? Although I look very Aspie, this is where I go back, what's driving it, the gears behind it are more autistic. But I don't mind people calling me Asperger's. I'm not going to go up to say, do not call me, because that's not fair. It doesn't bother me if people think I'm Aspie. But certainly looking at my gran as a personal example, and my dad are both Aspies, and my mum and me are both Auties, to me, it's hard to explain. You have to almost be there to see the differences in how we interact and the profile. Because my dad and gran certainly fit that profile, very logical, very literal, particularly my gran, goodness me. And I sometimes get drowned by his language, because I'm meaning deaf, so I try very hard to have a conversation with him. And then I sometimes, with my autiness, try and do all this, and he sort of thinks, you can tell he's sort of, I don't relate to that at all. But anyway, it's just something that has made sense to me. So it's personal. Do you understand that? Do you understand where Donna's coming from? Yeah, from who you've met? The profile. It's good that someone really is having a go at doing something like this. I think we have to thank Donna for that. She's helped me a lot. That fruit salad I wouldn't have done without her help. She's done so much for me, really. Next slide, please. So here are my books. That's my autobiography, and that's about scotopic sensitivity syndrome. Now, I've talked a bit about that today, the object and meaning blindness, dyslexia, and dyscalculia, and the overview of scotopic sensitivity syndrome is how one processes light. And that is why mine are particularly dark. I wouldn't be able to cope with these fluorescent lights without them. Some fluorescent lights cause physical pain. Autistic people give them headaches, make them feel weighed down. So again, if they're in a learning environment, you get the communication profile right, but you don't get the sensory profile right. It's not going to work. You've got to get both right. Do you see that? And for it to work. And this one is got forward by Tony Atwood, which I'm very pleased. Pocket-sized guide for parents, professionals, and people on the autistic spectrum. Basically, just through my life, I've just condensed all the technicalities I've gone on with today and just simplified them and refined them further as an easy read for people. To sort of, through my, how can I put it, through my life and some of the experiences I've gained, I want to give something back, really. That's the basis behind all of them, but in particular, that last one, about a guide to help parents and carers and people on the spectrum. Next slide. And, that's good, isn't it? 10 minutes early. And was that informative? Yes. Yeah. Did the fruit salad make sense?
Yes.
That's the bit that, yeah, because I I think that's something that's very important. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this speech, and it's now time for questions. Thank you very much.